I'm David Kramer. I'm the Associate Dean of Medical Education at the ANU Medical School, and I'm in charge of, I'm the Delegated Authority for Admissions. And this talk is about applying to the ANU Medical School, particularly this year with COVID, but also gives information about how you would apply in normal years that haven't been affected by COVID. So, without further ado, all right, so for those of you who were here before, we introduced the idea that the medical school, like all schools, has a purpose statement that the AMC requires. And our purpose is about graduating competent doctors who are compassionate, know their skills, know how to deal with people, that they have knowledge of Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander health and societies, that they understand the health challenges of rural Australia and understand some of the solutions for that, and that they have the capacity to participate in medical research and produce documents and are dedicated to advancing medical knowledge. Why choose ANU Medical School? This is where we lost the plot in the last recording. So ANU's ranked in the top 20 in universities in the world through the QS ratings. And within our medical school, one of the advantages of our medical school is the size. So we have, we're funded for 360 students, and we have roughly 100 students per year. It means we have very small cohorts and small group teaching. And that's really where ANU has the ability to provide a unique, intimate experience of learning. It means you can't hide, but it also means that you're well supported within the group. We have a very diverse and engaged student body, and our ANU Medical Student Society does all sorts of very excellent work, including running tutorials for our lower class students. So in our first and second years, benefit from the knowledge of our third and fourth years who run tutorials on weekends for them to help them master the material, do things like run mock assessments for them, and generally support their well-being. The Student Society participates in the governance of the medical school through work on committees, through their own committee work, and through the president of the Student Society, who has regular meetings with the director of our medical school. They also coordinate a lot of fun activities such as the Medical Students Review and things such as social and outreach programs. Canberra sometimes get knocked by Australians because it's remote from Sydney and Melbourne, but it's really a great little city to live in. It's very easy to get around. It has a good cafe lifestyle. It has a very highly educated population. And so it has theater, it has cafes, it has very good restaurants. And a lot of people get around Canberra by bike and commute to the medical school.
David, sorry to interrupt. Could you just put up the slides, share the screen?
Oh, I haven't been sharing the screen.
No. Thank you.
Okay. Is that better?
Perfect.
Okay, so here's lovely pictures. All right, so then we'll move on now that we've done that. And we'll talk about our campuses. So the main campus of ANU is in a suburb called Acton, which is right in the middle of the city and on the shores of the Lake Burley Griffin. So the medical school is close to the lake, and you can take a really nice walks around the lake if you are so inclined. The medical school is in a heritage listed building, which is shown here up in the right-hand panel. And the medical school itself is housed in the ground level, and the students have the whole of the first level of the building. on one wing of the building. And this is where our PBL rooms are, where students have lockers and a meeting area, like a recreational area, and also computers and breakout rooms to conduct their group work in. One day a week as an underclassman, so what we call our phase 1 students, so the first 2 years, where you're learning about systems physiology and pathophysiology. Students go to our Canberra-based hospital at TCH, the Canberra Hospital in Woden. And here they undertake a day of clinical skills training and learning from clinicians about some clinical topics. So from the first week, you have an immersive experience at the hospital and learn about aspects of patient communication, patient interactions, managing problems in patients, and then also learning how to take medical histories and do physical examinations. And that occurs one day a week for both the first and second year students. And our third and fourth year students, cohorts of them, are based at the Canberra Hospital, or they're based at a hospital in the Belconnen area called the Calvary Hospital, where students undertake medicine and surgery rotations as an alternative to doing medicine and surgery at Canberra. We have a very active rural clinical school. So the federal government, through the Department of Health, funds the medical schools in the country to provide education in regional parts of Australia. And part of our mission in understanding rural health and promoting solutions to rural health problems is to provide access to rural training sites for our students. And this is part of our relationship with the Department of Health and our funding model. And many Australian medical schools have similar programs. Our footprint is located in the southeast corner of New South Wales and in the north and northwest region directly related to Canberra, where students can go and spend time in rural general practices and have some exposure. So this happens in our first year and our second year, where you will spend a week in one of these sites learning about the rural communities, learning about the role of the doctors in the rural communities, and learning about allied health services and how they're delivered in rural communities. Then in year 3, and all students in year 3 undertake a 6-week placement in one of these rural towns. And in year 4, they can do an optional 6 weeks in a rural town as well, doing part of their medicine and surgery rotations. Within the year 3 program, there's also the opportunity for students to spend the whole of year 3 in one of the satellite towns for what we call our rural nodes. So that there are the satellite towns are shown here. They're all within close proximity to a larger regional center that has a base hospital, and students will be embedded in general practices and then travel to the base hospital for clinical skills teaching and more hospital-based learning. So they might follow a patient into the hospital with their GP and observe how the model of care in the hospital compared to the general practices, but they also do learning and participate in lectures with the Canberra-based students through remote learning technologies. We have, and that program is referred to our rural health stream. So about 18 to 20 students each year participate in that integrated year 3 placement. But we also have another stream, which is called the Indigenous health stream. Now, the Indigenous health stream is not as structured in terms of there's not a year-long placement in it, but students have increased opportunities to be exposed to clinical settings that are involved in delivery of Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander health. And this can include a 6-week placement in the Northern Territory for some students. And this is a very sought after placement, which occurs in the latter half of year 3. So moving on to our curriculum. The curriculum is delivered in 2 phases. And you can think of these as preclinical and clinical-based learning. However, we prefer to just refer to them as phases because we do have quite an extensive immersive experience 1 day a week in clinical learning in phase 1. So the phase 1 curriculum is a PBL, or problem-based learning supported curriculum, that is supplemented with lectures, practicals, tutorials, and these learning activities explore the social, ethical, legal, and scientific foundations of health and medicine. Then in phase 2, we have experiential learning as part of a clinical team. And this is immersive, so you are attached to a clinical department, you have a clinical supervisor, you will have supervisors who will be on the ward, who will help look after you, and you go through and are integrated in the team, and you learn procedures and function as a team member. And then we have a very strong teaching program that supplements that. And so the students will have a number of shifts on hospital wards during the week, and in between their shifts, they'll have some teaching activities that they will then attend as well. Right? All medical schools within Australia follow a basic 4-theme structure that's accredited by the Australian Medical Council. People call them different by different names, but they essentially have the same functions, in that we have medical science, which is the basis of physiology and pathophysiology, so the study of normal biology of health, and then the biology and chemistry that happens when normal physiological systems become disrupted and you have manifestation of disease. We have a theme on clinical skills where we teach students how to speak to patients to elicit a history and how to observe patient signs and elicit signs through physical examination techniques. And this includes evidence-based medicine, which is the appraisal of research evidence and using that, applying that to make decisions. So then the other 2 themes we have in the program are population health and professionalism and leadership. Population health is all about studying public health policies, understanding how research in population health outcomes is conducted, and being able to interpret those research outcomes to understand how policies create better health outcomes. And then we have professionalism and leadership, which speaks to the ethics of being a doctor, so the rules of being a doctor, the expectations. And within Australia, the ACT is unique in that it has a very strong human rights legislative framework upon which medicine sits. And so we will talk to you about the legal issues in human rights, health law, and how this relates to the practice of medicine in an ethical manner. We also in our medical school have 4 what we call frameworks. And these are areas that we teach people about within these various themes. So these will include our rural health, our Indigenous health, social foundations of medicine, and research. And the social foundations of medicine is something that the ANU Medical School has a unique emphasis on. And this is something that the students really enjoy interacting with this curriculum. And the way the curriculum is structured is that we go through a series of blocks in teaching. So we have semesters, but we're really teaching blocks. And the first 6 of these blocks are aligned with physiological systems. So we go through cardiovascular and renal, we go through endocrine, for instance, and proceed through all the systems. And then we have a block that integrates learning and prepares students for learning in the clinical environment, which is our block 7. This is the last block of year 2. And then we have 4 semesters of clinical rotations. And so this curriculum structure is shown here. So these are the blocks. You can read what they are. Students engage in a research project starting in their first year, which they complete in their second year. And we have structured exam periods at the endpoints of all 4 years and at the midpoint of year 2 and year 1. And then we have a series of rotations that students go through in clinical departments in 2 main blocks, which are called Foundations of Internal Medicine and Surgery and Integrated Community and Children's Health. And this integrated community includes the general practice rotations. And students in year 3 will start in one of these blocks and then take the second block in the second semester. The students in the rural stream do an integrated curriculum. And then in the final year, students will study senior medicine and acute surgery or women's health and newborn care in their first semester, and then again, swap over the curriculum. And then we have final exams at the end of year 4. All right, so we'll talk briefly about how you get into the medical school and how you apply. So in order to be eligible for consideration for our medical school, you need to have a GAMSAT score of 55 overall with minimum scores of 50 in each section of the GAMSAT. You need to have, at a minimum, a final year GPA of 5.6 or greater. Our median GPA tends to be higher than that, somewhere around 6.5. We have no subject prerequisites to study graduate entry medicine, and we have students that come from a very diverse background of undergraduate degrees, although the majority come from a medical science or human biology background. The ANU Medical School awards bonus points for students who have advanced degrees. So if you have completed a master's by research or are in the process or have completed honors, you're eligible for a 2% bonus. But if you have completed a PhD, you're eligible for a 4% bonus to your combined GAMSAT, and weighted GPA. Like we said before, we have a class size of about 100 for each year, and these are mixed between the Commonwealth supported places and the bonded medical places. I'm not going to talk too much about the BMP scheme. That's something that you can look up on both our website and on the GEMSAS website and follow links to, and there's a link at the end of the presentation for that. So how we select students is based on a calculated of a weighted GPA in the GEMSAS system, the GAMSAT score, so these are normalized and by GEMSAS, and then if a student is eligible for a bonus, that's applied on top, and that ranks a student for eligibility for interview. And we then conduct our interview for the students, and then our selection into medicine and for ranking is weighted 50-50 between these 2 scores. So the offer list is produced through GEMSAS, and this year the medical school applications close on June 11th. So how selection into medical school works in the system is that we have students sit the GAMSAT. The GAMSAT results are valid for a 2-year period. And so students applying in this year would have had to have sat the GAMSAT either in March or September last year or in the online May sitting this year. The GPA is calculated using the GEMSAS calculator and whether or not you get bonus points. These then are fed into GEMSAS, and the GEMSAS algorithm takes your highest preference for which you have qualified based on how the individual medical schools do the rankings, and then allocates you to a medical school for interview. So you may or may not get an interview at your highest preference school. The medical schools then conduct interviews and submit the interview schools to GEMSAS. GEMSAS will then standardize that interview score. And so the interview score that you have goes into the GEMSAS system as a standardized score, which means that the score is equivalent to your performance as though you had been interviewed at any one of the partner medical schools. Then GEMSAS will then take the scores plus the GPA and GAMSAT scores to run this through another algorithm and create a preliminary offer list that they send to schools. The schools then will look at the eligible candidates for their list and take into consideration the government requirements and targets for the rural origin students, which need to be 28% of our commencing cohort, and for the bonded medical place students, which also need to be 28% of the cohort. So in GEMSAS, you have the opportunity to identify whether or not you're willing to accept a BMP place. This then is resubmitted to GEMSAS, and a final offer list is created. Now, what can happen at this point is that the students that come into this shortlist may or may not have interviewed at our medical school. Generally, our final offer list contains about 80% of candidates who have interviewed with us, but it also includes candidates who have interviewed at other medical schools where they interviewed at a higher preference and then were passed on to us. All right, so the BMP scheme is about funding places where recipients are required to undertake a return of service obligation. And this currently is equivalent to 3 years over an 18-year period. So it's quite flexible. And usually within college training programs, there's quite a lot of flexibility to undertake this in the course of the normal training. So it's not a overly onerous requirement. And in fact, most CSP place graduates would actually meet these requirements. If we have any Indigenous applicants in the audience, we have a special pathway to consider Indigenous applicants, in which we have a special interview that's a culturally appropriate interview that we offer to these students, and we have a range of scholarships available to our Indigenous commencing students. And the closing dates through GEMSAS, this should be 11th of June, but you can have direct applications to medical school by the 6th of July. All right, and within our medical school, we have the ability to offer up to 20 places for international students each year. This is by a direct application to the medical school, and we conduct interviews over the Zoom platform. Okay, so this year has been quite challenging to us because of COVID. Our teaching has all gone online. We finally have students back in clinical placements, but our selection processes are going to be conducted online. So that we have, for those of you who sat the GAMSAT, you experienced an online GAMSAT, but our interviews this year will be conducted online. And there are some issues with how universities are awarding grades in 2020 for anyone who is currently an undergraduate student. So if you haven't done so, you can look at the 2021 GEMSAS admissions guide. This can be downloaded from the GEMSAS website. And in there, they have a section that talks about how the different universities are dealing with COVID in their responses. And one of the main takeaway messages for us is that we have not changed our processes at all for this, because some schools, and that's on the next slide, have decided to not include 2020 results. We don't think that's fair to students, but we do have a requirement that in order for us to generate a GPA for the final year, students have to have completed 0.375 full-time equivalents, which is equivalent to 3 out of 8 subjects in a normal load, as a graded result for us to give them a GPA calculation for the final year. If students haven't met that, then what happens is that their final year grades won't be included in the calculation of their GPA, but they'll still be considered for the medical program. So this is different from a couple of other schools that have decided that they're not going to including 2020 results in their calculations. So how does the ANU look at GPAs? Well, we look at GPAs based on a weighted results, and depending upon the institution you study at, there are different conversions from your host institution to the GEMSAS GPA calculator. And if you haven't done this already, you just go to GEMSAS and plug in your school and your results, and it spits out your GPA. So for us, it's the final GPA for the final year, and that is weighted at a level of 3. And then the final year minus the year before minus 1 becomes weighted times 2, and then the final year minus the second to last year is weighted at 1. And so for each year to count, it has a minimum of 0.375 FSOLs. So there are certain subjects that are traditionally graded as pass-fail, and these include clinical placements. Like if someone's done a nursing degree, they might have done a clinical placement, and generally that's graded as an ungraded pass. And so usually what we do in those circumstances is that those have a neutral effect on the GPA. But this year, a number of universities, including the ANU, have allowed students who have been forced into remote learning to take ungraded passes as an option. And there are some universities who are only giving ungraded passes. And this has flow-on effects. And so I'll just go through quickly, because I'm aware of the time since we had the delayed start. So this is an example of how a GPA is calculated based on a table shown here on the left. So a student has these results in their 3 years. The GPA points are calculated based on the derived GPA from the year multiplied by 3 for the F-1 multiplied by 2, and for F-2 multiplied by 1. The points are added up and then divided by 6 to give a GPA in this case of 6.29. if a student has an ungraded pass in their course, so this might be an example where we have a student who is currently studying the final year of their undergraduate degree and is applying for medical school this year. The medical school considers results in September, which is in the middle of semester 2. And so we don't know what the semester 2 results are. And so we derive an indicative GPA for their final year, in which case the GPA would be based on the 2 high distinctions and the distinction, giving a GPA of 6.67. And this ungraded pass that this student has would be assigned a value of 6.67, essentially. So it has a neutral influence on how we calculate the GPA. And in this case, the student's GPA comes out at a 6.4. So students might be concerned, if they're current students, about the consequence of being graded pass-fail in this COVID environment. And this slide it looks pretty complicated, but it's actually fairly straightforward. And if a student does not have 3 out of 8 graded results in 2020, so some universities are just giving ungraded passes for the whole year. If that happens, then we cannot assign a GPA for that year. And so we simply omit that in how we do calculations. So if we have students who are applying this year for admission in 2021 and or beyond, if they don't do further study, we would not have a GPA calculated for the final year. So we would only base their ranked GPA based on the results from 2019 and 2018. If a student is going to graduate next year, so 2020 is their second year of study, then the middle value GPA, if they don't meet this criteria, falls out, and we would calculate the GPA based on their 2021 results and their 2019 results. And if they're a first year student and their final year is 2022 and they don't have a first year result, then we would base their results solely on their final year and in their second year. If you are a student who is studying and completing honors or a postgraduate degree, the final year becomes the last year of your qualifying degree. So if you've completed a 2-year master's, the final year of your master's becomes your final year. The first year of your master's becomes your F-1 year, and your third year of your undergraduate degree would then become your F-2 year. So that if you have a higher degree, we consider those grades first, and we look at the last year you've studied, and then the year before that, and the year before that. All right, so this is just showing that if you have, for our current students, if they take 2 ungraded passes in semester 1, this is not a very wise decision to do because it negates any performance that you have here, because this person would only have completed 0.25 FTEs, and so they're not eligible for a GPA calculation, even though they have 2 high distinctions that would normally raise their GPA. But because of the requirements in the algorithm, we're unable to calculate a GPA in that case. So we would want to encourage students who are in their final year of study and applying this year to make sure they have 3 graded results in 2020 if they want these results to be included in the calculation of their GPA. And it seems a little harsh, but we don't have the second semester grades for this. And so we need to be able to base it on 3 courses that have been completed. All right, there's a lot of questions about relative disadvantage that students have suffered as a result of COVID. And the message that we have is that, unfortunately, these disadvantaged results need to be investigated at your host university instituting the grades. The medical school nor GEMSAS is able to consider any circumstances that an applicant might have in the process. So there's no way for us to award consideration for people based on COVID-19. So just wrapping this up, our medical school interviews will be conducted online. So if you get an invitation for interview, you'll have a two-part interview. One part will be a scheduled online interview where you will be given a series of recorded prompts and asked to respond. Those responses will be recorded and uploaded, and they will be then marked. And then we'll have a Zoom panel interview that will last for 30 minutes, where you will be interacting live with a panel of people, including representatives from the clinical sciences and medicine, community, academic, and other individuals that will form your panel. All right, so we'll leave this slide up in case you want to jot down any of the links, and we can open the discussion for questions. And here, yes, we can. So there's two questions already. The first question is, can we share these slides after the presentations? So the answer to that is yes. I can put a PDF onto our medical school website. And I'm quite happy for that information to go out. So that's quite easy to do. I think that the group hosting this has recordings of it. And so that is possible to watch that. And then someone asked, do standalone honors results count in the GP calculation? Okay, so that depends on whether or not you have completed honors. So if you have a completed honors and you have grades at the time that, say, July of this year, and they can get into the system, the honors will be included. If you are concurrently studying honors and will be completing honors this year in December or by December 31st, then you're eligible to receive the 2% bonus, but the honors grades would not contribute to your calculated GPA. So you do get some benefit of doing honors, but you have to have a completed result for us to consider that in a GPA calculation. All right. Any other questions? You can use the chat function, or I guess the chat function would be the best way to go. So are there any other questions? All right, so there's a question about the bonuses. The bonuses applied at the offer for interview stage, but it then propagates into the final ranking. So you get a rank number or a selection number from your GPA and GAMSAT to rank you for offer for interview, and that score stays with you. So that bonus applies in both circumstances. Okay, so it's after 7. I do apologize for the glitch. It wasn't my fault, but I do apologize anyway. On behalf of the organizers, we don't know what happened, but we got through it. So I hope that you enjoyed the seminar. Someone's asking about student housing at ANU. ANU is committed to provide student housing to all commencing first-year undergraduate students, and then offers housing to medical students as a secondary consideration. So all of our students, to my knowledge, who seek housing generally are successful, provided that they apply for housing in a timely manner. So they can live in certain college residencies, but a number of them opt to live in group houses off campus. Okay, so there's a question about how we're going to conduct the interview. At the moment, we're working on that. It'll be modified version of situational interviews, but it will also be structured interview questions in the first interview. So we're looking into that. I can't really answer the question about the parts of the recorded interview and what it will cover. All right, and someone's asking about the structures of the interviews. The idea will be that you'll have a window to engage with the online recorded system, and then you'll have a separate day where you would have the panel interviews. We probably wouldn't try to organize you to do both on one day. It'd probably be you do one in 1 week and one in the following week, but we're still working on the logistics of that. Okay, so if there's no more questions, Shelley's my admissions coordinator and the font of all knowledge for admissions. You can send an email to our admissions team if you have questions about that. The email link is shown on the slide, but also if you just go and search for the medical school, the admissions links are very apparent on the medical school website under the MCHD and how to apply tabs.